Good morning. My name is Rachel Shield. I'm the Director of Engagement here at Westminster Presbyterian Church, and we're so glad you're joining us for this session of adult education. Many of you will be joining us on a Sunday morning, and some of you will see us later. This is the first in our series of sessions on theology of play. We're really excited to learn together this summer, and we have today two folks with us who are going to join this conversation. One is our very own Matt Llewellyn-Otten, who is the Director of Youth Ministries here at Westminster, and the other is Courtney Goto, who was a professor of Matt's, and so we have a connection to her through Matt, which is really fun. Dr. Courtney Goto is Associate Professor of Religious Education and Co-Director of the Center for Practical Theology at Boston University's School of Theology. Dr. Goto's research interests include intersections of racism, culture, and faith, as well as aesthetic teaching and learning, creativity, and embodied knowing. Her most recent work is called Taking on Practical Theology, the Idolization of Context and the Hope of Community, in which she examines power and privilege and knowledge production in the field of practical theology from her perspective as a Japanese American. She is also author of The Grace of Playing, Pedagogies for Leaning into God's New Creation, a book inspired by experiments with teaching and her mother's sanctuary art. Thank you so much for being here, Courtney.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Matt, for the opportunity to be here. Greetings, everyone. I'm so thrilled to have this opportunity to explore playing with you. And when I got the email letting me know about what you folks were doing, I just couldn't say no, because it's such a great thing to be thinking about, especially in terms of as we are coming out of this pandemic. So I want to start with where I think you folks are. Instead of just requiring you to start where I am, I wanted to give you some impressions about Westminster and looking at your website. And it looks like your congregation that's in the heart of the city, and you're educating yourselves in faith with justice for the whole of creation. And that was reflected in what's being offered in adult education, as well as the ministry teams. I was really impressed by active partnerships with the community. And it looks like you're doing some vital creative work. Now, it would be easy to assume that play is something that's a needed break or an antidote from the hardship or the serious work of learning, serving, worshiping, and advocacy. And God knows right now we need fun, we need joy, we need lighthearted experiences, especially as we are transitioning to a kind of new normal, and one that is more open and more like the old normal that we knew. You know, many of us are longing for connection, escape, and healing, and playing often involves such experiences. You know, it's logical to assume that playing only involves having these desirable experiences that make us laugh, feel easy and free. All of us have these kinds of everyday experiences that we can draw on from our own lives. So it's natural to take our own everyday experiences as a point of reference. It's easy to assume, for example, that playing comes through certain activities, such as games or sports or making art, to say, yes, this is play, or no, that's not play, based on what people actually do, as opposed to the experience that people have. And I want to say that, you know, these common ways of thinking about playing is potentially true of playing, but not only true of playing. And so it might be helpful to distinguish playing, which is a mode of relating that is creative, spontaneous, and co-constructed, from playfulness, which is a particular attitude that one brings to an activity or relationship. So, and today I'm really, and then in the book, The Grace of Playing, I really talk about playing, which is a kind of broader category of thing. And I hope to help folks recognize moments of playing in Westminster Church's ministry where you might not expect it, or consider how you play with the sacred a bit differently in the future, from having language to think about it. So my impression is that the church is trying to open up more life-giving possibilities for believers, both in themselves and with others. And playing as a lens for reflecting on how spirit can be involved in this process. So first, we need to explore what playing is in a kind of broader sense, and in a sense that may not be so familiar with how you might assume. And my thinking is influenced particularly by a body of work by D.W. Winnicott, who was a British pediatrician and psychoanalyst. And this body of work comes from what's called object relations theory. But so before I get into sort of theory, I want to introduce you to my mom. Now, this is sort of appropriate because Winnicott derived his body of work by observing moms with children. And the idea is that our first experiences of playing as infants with the mother or our caregiver is really formative. And it's not just something that happens only in childhood, but it's something that happens across the lifespan. And in fact, we never stop playing. So in this presentation, I want to introduce you to my mom, and she's a character in the book, so you might recognize her from there. And it's there's no picture of her, and there's no backstory about her or my relationship with her. And so it's this is just to fill out a little bit of a picture if you have a chance to read the book. So I'm going to share screen and introduce you to her. So this is Mom. Her name is Naomi Goto. She lives in California, in the capital city, Sacramento, which is where I grew up. She is a textile artist, a visual artist, and a teacher, although she's not been trained doesn't have formal training in art or education. And as I said, she's someone I write about in The Grace of Playing, and she spent over 20 years making or curating sanctuary art for the church of my childhood, which is the Sacramento Japanese United Methodist Church. Here she is in her sewing room. This is like where it all happens, all the creativity. And so I'm going to introduce you to a way of playing, in a way that she played with me, and I'm going to play with Rachel and Matt. And I invite all of you watching this to play along. So but first I'm going to show you a definition of playing that comes from the book, just to keep this in mind, because we'll come back to it when we unpack our experience of playing. So to play is to experience losing and finding oneself in engaging reality and one another as if, exploring freely a world of possibilities bounded by structure that facilitates relationship. Okay, so let me show all of you this image, and then I'll ask Rachel and Matt. So this is a mode of engaging playing where my mom gave me this object and said, "What is it?" So look at this object. All right, so any ideas, Rachel or Matt? What is it?
I see a creature engaged in a hug.
It does look like a hug.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're missing hugs, Rachel.
I for sure am missing hugs. Sure.
Yeah, and I saw like a musical instrument almost, of like being able to like make a popping noise or something with it.
Yes.
Is what I kind of saw. And maybe like the arms, the hugging arms, are a way for it to be like mobile, transportable, more easily carried somewhere. That's what I saw. But I'd love
great ideas. Okay, and if you're guessing along with us, I hope you will also form an impression and about what this is. So I'm going to share screen again and show you what it is.
Oh.
So the object is a collection of 5 chopsticks holders. And each chopstick holder, when you stand it upright, looks like a fox. And the story behind it is that when Mom went to Japan, she met a little old man sitting on the sidewalk carving. And she was so curious, she stopped and he showed her what it was. And to her surprise, it was these chopstick holders. All right, so let's move on to the next item. What is it? Or let's do a variation of this, not just what is it, but what does it say? And so I have to give you a little clue here, because this is the same object but turned. So you have to read it like a spiral image.
Okay. I think it says hitch your star to my wagon. And then there's another word, but I haven't made sense of it yet.
What's your guess, Matt?
Oh gosh, yeah. And now I can't help it.
Did I mess it up?
Hitch your star to my wagon to I don't know. Is it an orange too? It looks like an orange.
It is an orange.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I'm stuck on. It's an orange, and it's obviously carved very carefully and artfully, and yeah.
Okay, so any more guesses about that last phrase? You got almost Rachel, you got the entire phrase except that last piece. What's the last piece?
I mean, now I'm trying to think of like constellations that have like is there like a there's not a persimmon. Is there like a Perseus or Pegasus? I don't know.
Or a Prius?
Good guesses. Okay. So the last phrase is my precious.
Oh, there we go.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So let me tell you the story. So when I was in high school, my mom every morning would stand at the sink and she would carve a message into an orange. And she would send it to school in my lunch bag. Mm. And so when I got to school, it got to the point where everyone knew that I had these talking oranges. She calls them love oranges. Aww. And people would ask, the message would go up, the call would go out, what does the orange say? And so after I had a chance to read it, then it would get passed around the lunch yard. Mm. And like my friends would want to know, like be able to have this chance to play and like decode what the message was. Mm. And so my mom became known as like the cool mom for doing this, during high school. And there are people still to this day who remember these oranges.
That's so great. I'm thinking back to when I was in high school. Like if my mom wrote me a note on a little a napkin or something, I'd be so embarrassed.
Yeah, exactly.
But
right?
The orange makes it like so playful, and everybody gets a chance to look at it. And
yeah, it becomes this other thing than a private note, even though the message is quite private, right? Yeah. Somehow it being a kind of on this object in a different medium matters. Mm-hmm. And we should say, like, so this is at a time before text messaging. And before you had those old phones where you had to go 111 for a certain letter, or, where you were doing shortened versions of words before predictive text. So this is way before texting and predictive text. Mom was making these messages via orange. All right, so last object of what is it? What is it?
Oh, we're seeing a Word doc here, Courtney.
Oh, you don't need to say that. See that?
I thought maybe you're making a point about.
I know,
no, that
yeah,
was
I was like,
boring.
Everything is what it seems.
That's what happens when you have two screens. Let me share the other screen. My apologies. Thanks for letting me know. All right.
Oh, so it's the hug that we all need, and it's to be used as needed when needed.
Yes. Yeah, so that is another object that comes from my high school days. When I was a junior in high school, I was nominated to go to Girls State. Does Minneapolis have Girls State and Boys State?
I don't know. I've never heard of it.
I don't think so here, but I'm familiar with it because it's
okay. So it's a statewide simulation where young people are brought together to simulate the election process. And so so anyway, you simulate elections from your city to your which is your town, to your county, to the whole body, which is the whole state. And so I went, and I was totally reluctant to go because it was like, who wants to be with a bunch of girls for a week? And so my mom sent me this care package with this in it. And it is so this is a paper hug, and you got it right immediately. And there was actually a set of 3, and some girls in my town convinced me to run for governor, and so I started wearing the paper hug as I was meeting people, and people would go, "What is it?" And it would start up this whole conversation of like that I would have never had. And I'm a very introverted person, and God knows when I was younger, I was even more introverted and shy, had never run for anything in my life. And yet this was sort of like an icebreaker that, my mom gave me, didn't intend it for it to be anything other than a gift to me, but it ended up helping me like have more confidence and like a way to engage people, kind of not unlike the oranges.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the story behind that object. And the funny thing was that I won.
That was gonna be my follow-up question. I want to know if you won.
I did. I think it was because mom.
Totally. That's really great. I love the idea of like these objects becoming something that is other than what it was, and then we're interacting with them within some type of boundary. You in this definition that you shared with us, there is some boundary setting of the way in which you interact with all of those things. And it's like, this is a hug, and I know what to do with the hug. And I know that the orange has a message, but also it's to nourish me as well. So
yes. Your mind is already going in the direction that I was hoping.
Sorry.
It's great. Yes. Yeah. So let's go back to this idea of playing as a mode of relating. So now you've got these examples that are so intimately connected of relating between mom and me, for example. So these were one-on-one interactions of her wanting to connect with me, but also like in my sharing it with you, then we are connected in the playing through these objects. And so we are engaging one another. And to go back to my definition about engaging reality and one another as if, so, in a way, I don't know if we were successful or not, but we could have been engaging as if time didn't exist, or as if we were in person and we were not on Zoom. Or if you might have, when I was telling the stories about the objects, maybe you imagine you were mom in Japan, or you were me in high school, when you were tracking what was happening. And in our interaction, in our playing, we were also exploring like these possibilities. You were telling me a little bit more about you and how you were imagining, especially that first object that was quite ambiguous, all these possibilities of what that object could be. So all of those objects had possibilities that extended beyond just what they appeared to be. You immediately grasped of like, oh, the possibility of not just being a private message, but it being like, oh, a shared experience, and something that could be appreciated together, and something like that would bind my friends and me together, or the people that I was meeting wearing the paper hug. And Matt, you're exactly right. There was some structure. There was structure even in my engagement with you just now. It wasn't going to go on forever. And I gave you a little brief instruction about how this would go. And this last thing about losing and finding yourself. Now, in our brief playing, we probably weren't engaged long enough for anyone to feel kind of lost and found in the experience. I think those things take time, and those things take relationship. But that's where the definition points. And so oftentimes those kinds of deeper experiences of playing, of losing and finding oneself, comes with more and more practice of returning again and again, and like being able to lose kind of yourself in the form, rather than like, oh, so we are new to each other. And so this is a first playing, which is special in and of itself, but longer time playing and playing with people with whom you have a deeper relationship opens up something else. So I want to say a little bit about revelatory experiencing and thinking about it with mom through playing. And so in my relationship with mom, there were unexpected and needed outcomes that graciously and spontaneously emerged. So, here I was with, I didn't know that I could have deeper relationships with people in the lunch yard, or have a way to reach out to complete strangers campaigning to be governor, that we could have kind of a human contact just over something as unusual as a paper hug. And even now, the outcomes are still being generated and in a gracious way. So tonight, when I talk to mom on the phone, I will describe to her what it was like to engage both of you, and the possibility of engaging people online with things that she created that she at the time had no idea would have any kind of life beyond that moment or just with me. And so it's a kind of reverberation that goes out, which I think is an interesting way of thinking about how spirit can work, and in the grace of spirit. There can be a deepening of self and of relationship. And so you can understand how my relationship with mom has deepened because of like these repeated episodes of playing. And so if you can think of like, these are 3 episodes in my life, but over a lifetime, you can imagine having many more. And that it also helps me be in touch with myself, who I am, where I come from, who she is as a person. What is my inheritance as her daughter to do this creative work? And that in itself is a kind of sacred truth about being in the world. And in some senses is godly. So now I want to say that success or failure of playing, playing doesn't always happen. I think we all know that. I mean, that's why like just judging playing by what we're doing isn't always a good judge of playing, because you can be doing the same thing on one day as another day. And sometimes it really feels like a gift. It feels creative and spontaneous, and other days it just doesn't. Or it can be with certain people, but not other people. And that's also says something about the depth of relationship and the space of playing. And I want to say a little bit about, like, people might say, well, wait a minute, like, I like to play alone. Where in your definition does that apply to me? And I think Winnicott would say, actually, playing alone is never really playing alone, because you're always evoking the space of having been with other people, even when you are alone. All right, so now I'm going to ask both of you, what do you have with you that is of great personal, but not necessarily great monetary value? And I'd invite you to share that with us.
Great. Rachel, would you like to go first, or do you want me to?
You go, Matt.
Okay.
You go. Yeah.
Okay, so I just grabbed this off of my shelf here. And so there's this sign here. I hope it's the right way for you all. But this little sign, if you just look at the light pieces of wood, it doesn't look like much of anything. But if you're able to look past it, and you're able to look at the dark pieces that kind of go in between the light pieces, it says the words Jesus. It says the word Jesus. And so you have to look right past it and kind of through it. And so there's an old message on the back. It's this paper is kind of very much falling apart off of this thing. So I'll tell you a little bit more. Is it okay if I tell a little bit history about it too, Courtney? And
absolutely, this is
okay, great. It says Jesus plaques remind us that when we look at the light parts, we cannot see Jesus. Just when we look at the dark, Jesus appears. He is always with us in the dark of life. And so my grandmother got this when she was experiencing a divorce from her husband, and she got this as a gift from somebody, and this was always sitting in her apartment. And I remember coming over to visit her as a kid, and this plaque being there, and always being kind of transfixed by it, always wanting to pick it up, always wanting to touch it, always wanting to look at it and see if it says anything else other than Jesus. And one Christmas she gave it to me, and it's just one of those little precious gifts that it always ends up in my church office, or it ends up like in the prime place and wherever I am at home. And it's just that object that I always make sure, if I've moved several times, it like ends up in my backpack, because I want to make sure it's with me. It's really precious. And I think of my grandmother, who in a lot of ways helped to shape my faith and has been a person that has always supported me, kind of no questions asked, kind of supported me. And I love to look at it and see Jesus, but also my grandmother, who I think bears the light of Jesus all the time. So, yeah.
Thank you. What a great object. And it was fascinating to see it one way and then like see it, and it was like, oh, how could I have not seen that? That's a great moment of playing, of like of that unexpected, which I think is a wonderful kind of symbol for Jesus, and the way God's Spirit can surprise us.
Yeah, and as I've kind of, formed my own ideas of, theology, this idea of the light and the dark kind of is muddled for me. And but this kind of sticks with me of, in my life, I've, battled with depression. I live with depression and, several moves and kind of vocational calling things and deaths, and have felt as if, there is, I'm living in a shroud of sorts, but, this really does remind me, and my grandmother, I can call her, and it's also a good reminder to call my grandmother, which I need to do. And so, yeah, it just kind of, it's something that I interact with pretty regularly. And I remember as a kid looking at it and never being able to figure it out. She didn't tell me what it was. I had to figure it out myself. And she would be like, nope, don't look at the back. We'll tell you what it is. So, yeah.
Wow. Wow. She was playing with you.
Oh, yeah. My grandmother taught me rummy and all of those things. She knows how to play. Yeah.
So great. So great.
Yeah.
All right, Rachel, what's your object?
All right, this is a new sacred object, and it is a postcard. It is a postcard of Naples, and it must be Grandmother Day because it's a postcard that my grandmother received apparently September 12th, 1955 from Naples, where that was where she was born. And she moved after World War II with my grandpa. They met during the war, and she moved here to Minnesota and was not received hospitably. So I imagine this thing that she received from home meaning a lot to her. But the funny thing about this thing is that I don't know how I got it. And it fell out of a pile of things, I don't know, about a month ago. And I just moved into this house in October under kind of difficult circumstances during a season of a lot of loss. And a lot of things were kind of falling apart in my world. And I was trying to make a new home here. And what I learned, this thing fell out. I looked at the address and it's blocks away from where I live right now. And it just felt to me, and actually I need to find someone who speaks Italian to read it to me because I don't even know what it says, but it felt to me, I asked my uncles about, and my dad, when did they live on this side of town? And it would have been one of their first apartments that they had together as a couple. And we talked, I had just been to the Italian deli that is like in the neighborhood. We talked about the Italian heritage of this area. And it was like, I just felt like a sense of home and rootedness that I hadn't felt yet. So it became sacred to me because it meant there's just this connection to my grandma who I love very much. She's still around, but she has Alzheimer's. And so I don't get to talk very much with her about the past. But since I've been here, I've been dancing a lot with my girls in our kitchen. And recently, someone saw me dancing and shared that, you remind me of your grandma dancing in the kitchen. So I remember that was a tradition my grandma had. So it feels like a connection to, must be Grandma Day, to my grandma and who she's been in my life. And it's nice to know she's walked these streets and been to some of the same stores that I'm visiting now.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. Thank you for sharing that beautiful story. And I'm so taken by this notion of like playing across generations. Mm-hmm. In your story and in Matt's story, it's really amazing. And I can imagine like the surprise to find that postcard. I mean, it's seemingly out of nowhere in such an unexpected way.
Yeah. At this time, it was so weird. What are the chances? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are no such coincidences. There's something there. And I think we all know those kinds of strange and mysterious happenings where something gracious emerges and something spontaneously happens. So some of the early work that I did for this work on playing was to phrase it as seeking the God of the unexpected.
Mm.
And so there's a way in which we're being in relationship with the God of the unexpected. And I think both of your stories kind of point to that kind of gracious unexpectedness that we so need, we don't even know we need. But when it appears, we go, oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I think during, you know, these past year and couple months of this type of isolation, you know, life has just happened and things have just moved for so many people. You know, life never stood still, and there have been kind of these, you know, there's chaos and there's mourning and there's sadness, but also there's these moments of this grace of spirit, as you put it, of, you know, these sweet moments that we can spontaneously see this, how the spirit moves. And I think, Rachel, that story of just your grandmother walking the blocks that you live now, oh gosh, that's beautiful. As Presbyterians would say, it would be predestined. So
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I'm also, you know, what struck me about the orange thing, the orange object, was that, and maybe even several of the objects, you know, that people could hear their own message that they needed to hear in the act of play. That it was, that there's something about the way that we experience the word that needed to come to us through play, and how I'm now finding my brain spinning, like thinking about all the other ways that we do it, that we seek out this, like, this word, the word that we need, and how often that is through play.
Yeah,
And
that's so well said, really. I want to say that there's a way in which all of these objects that we've seen and been playing with today helps us to hold on and feel held. You know, this is a work by my colleague Chris Schlau, who's an expert in Winnicott, and it's interesting that these are objects that we're holding on to. So you saw objects that I've held on since high school. Matt, you've held on to the Jesus sign all these years. Rachel, you're holding on to that postcard. But it's also the fact that these objects help us feel held by people who love us. And we feel connected to them. And it's because of the way that those objects evoke a space for us, that we can then be more inside ourselves, more creative in our relationships with other people. And so church has this unique role in providing certain kinds of objects that help believers hold on and feel held. So today we've been sharing kind of sacred everyday objects that are personal to us, but church actually has a kind of traditional set of things like biblical stories, symbols, and even the building itself. And they become sacred to us because of our ability to engage, their ability to engage us in reality and another reality, invite us to explore a world of possibilities, and allow us to lose and find ourselves. And so that's a way of like connecting, like this playing with what we do at church is actually not separate. And that that creates possibilities for revelatory experiencing with fellow believers, even people the saints who have come and gone. And to connect this to the justice work that the church is doing, that the church is creating conditions for playing by helping people relate in ways that people feel seen and known, and thereby more free to be present and creative. And so, if you're lucky as a church, you have some wisdom about how to play with people inside the church, people who are like one another. Now, that gets more complicated if you think about people who are beyond the church, people who are in the neighborhood, people who are not like us. Then how do you play? How do we create conditions for playing that allow others to dictate how play might proceed? So not just how we like playing, the ways that things are that are meaningful to us, but ways that others might share, that we might enter, or that we might establish together. What do they hold on to, and what do they need to feel held in order to be creative and spontaneous with others? I noticed there's a lot of work that you folks are doing on race. So this is these are interesting questions to think about the work on race. And finally, just to think about like the church's additional role to help creatively decenter learners in constructive ways, leaning into new possibilities while still being held. So all of us love like experiences of being held. That's why we hold on to like these objects that we have from our families or that are given to us through our faith community. But it's also not just the job to allow church to help us, or our families to help us feel comfortable and safe. That's wonderful and much needed, especially now. But also like we want to grow, and that requires some decentering. So we don't want to be so decentered that we're it's counterproductive and people are so threatened that they shut down. But that decentering, when it's constructive, also is centered in feeling held. And so how do we create these experiences? And Matt, I imagine you do this work already with young people. For example, using poetry or visual art or music to open up conversations about race or the environment, about homelessness. And that's another kind of playing of that balance between holding on, being held, and leaning into new things and being a little bit off balance. That all can be part of the richness of playing and opening up possibilities that we couldn't have imagined.
Yeah, one of my favorite activities to do with our confirmands is so our confirmation program is a year long, and it's our 9th graders, and it's kind of a way to segue them into the youth group and into the larger congregation, of course, too. But we do this activity where we look at different images of Jesus, and it's modern depictions of Jesus, it's old depictions of Jesus, it's Jesus as the immigrant, Jesus as the white man, it's Jesus as the black man, it's Jesus in art all around the world. And it's it is decentering. We ask the question of what looks familiar, what resonates with you right now, and then what is what you would use decentering, what kind of sits in its, that's weird, I've never seen Jesus like that, I've never seen such an angry Jesus. There's the angry Jesus throwing over the tables, or there's the sassy Jesus at the wedding, so there's like these different Jesuses that they kind of get the chance to play with and encounter that they've never been able to experience, but I've never framed it as play. And so that's really interesting it's great to think about it that way.
Great. Well, Rachel, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I'm so glad that you were here with us today. Thank you for this really fun way to engage this topic and for giving us so much rich food for thought. We are going to continue the conversation and hopefully have some bonus material for all of you to access as well as this session. So please stay tuned for that and look for that material as well on our YouTube channels and other video channels. Thanks for being here, Matt, as well. Really excited to continue to do more intergenerational work. So it's fun to have these conversations across ministry areas, and we look forward to more of that this summer. Please keep your eyes open for times that we can play together, including June 26th, when we're going to celebrate Play and Pride. We have more information about that on our website. Thanks, and we will see you next time.